The crystalline warship, luminous tide, drifted through the void. Its bio-luminescent hull shimmering with the cold pulse of distant stars. Commander Zapkel of the Zapirian Ascendancy watched from the observation spire, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the blue-green glow of the ship's energy cores. Below him, the crew moved in precise, insectile patterns, their segmented limbs adjusting the translucent control panels with practiced efficiency. Their mission had been simple: survey the ruins of Sol. The humans were gone, or so the Ascendancy believed. Their civilization had collapsed centuries ago, torn apart by wars and environmental collapse. The Zapirians had monitored their final transmissions, desperate, chaotic pleas for help that had dissolved into static. The galaxy had moved on, relegating humanity to a cautionary tale of reckless expansion. And yet, here, in the skeletal remains of a derelict orbital station, they had found Azur. Quilex, the ship's chief xenobiologist, adjusted the containment field with delicate precision. The cryopod was ancient, its surface pitted by micrometeorite impacts, its power source barely clinging to function. Inside, suspended in the pale blue glow of stasis fluid, was a human female. Zapkel's mandibles twitched in amusement. "A relic," he murmured, his voice a harmonic hum. "A fossil of a dead species." Quilex's antenna flicked in disagreement. "Her vitals are stable. The pod preserved her perfectly." Zapkel dismissed the notion with a ripple of his carapace. Humans were fragile, their flesh was soft, their bones brittle. Even if she survived thawing, she would be weak. Disoriented, a curiosity at best, the containment chamber hummed as the Zapirians initiated revival protocols. The stasis fluid drained, revealing the human in full. She was clad in a tattered military uniform, the insignia faded but still visible, fair UNSC. Her dark hair floated in the residual liquid before settling against her scalp. Then her eyes snapped open. Zapkel expected confusion, terror, the instinctive flinch of a primitive creature waking in an alien world. Instead, Major Victoria Banks inhaled sharply, off-controlled, and her gaze locked onto him with terrifying clarity. Her pupils dilated, adjusting to the light. Her fingers flexed, testing the limits of her atrophied muscles. And then she smiled, not the nervous twitch of a prey animal. The slow, deliberate grin of a predator recognizing weakness. Quilex took an involuntary step back, his bioluminescent markings flickering in alarm. Zapkel felt the first stirrings of unease. This was not the reaction of a broken species. This was the gaze of something that had waited. The stasis chamber hummed with residual energy, its crystalline surfaces still glowing faintly from the revival process. The human, whose Major Victoria Banks, remained motionless, suspended in the last remnants of fluid clinging to her skin. The Zapirians had expected sluggishness, disorientation. Instead, her stillness was that of a coiled spring. Zapkel's mandibles twitched. Protocol dictated a controlled introduction. Soft lights, modulated tones. The careful suppression of anything that might trigger a primitive's fight or flight response. But the human's eyes were already scanning the chamber, taking in the hexagonal patterns of the walls, the pulsing veins of blue, green energy in the floor, the way Quilex's bioluminescent markings flickered with unease. She was assessing. Quilex adjusted his scanner, the crystalline device emitting a series of rapid chimes. His tendrils stiffened as data scrolled across its translucent surface. Muscle density. Higher than baseline human records. Neural activity accelerated. This isn't atrophy. It's cellular adaptation. Zapkel's carapace tightened. Stasis was supposed to preserve, not enhance. Yet the woman before them moved with a predator's economy, rolling her shoulders as if testing restraints that weren't there. Then she spoke. Her voice was rough from disuse, but the words were clear, deliberate. "You're not uns." It wasn't a question. Zapkel hesitated. The Universal Neural Sync Codex should have auto-translated, yet her dialect was archaic, laced with inflections their databases didn't recognize. Before he could respond, she stepped forward, fluid, unhurried, and the chamber's ambient light caught the scars along her knuckles. Old wounds. A frequently used weapons. Quilic scanner chirped a warning. Elevated cortisol. Adrenaline spike. Shez. Preparing for a fight. Zapkal finished. The human's smile didn't waver. Across the room, a console flickered. The ship's AI, detecting an anomaly, began rerouting power to the containment field. Too late, Banks' hand shot out, fingers closing around a discarded shard of crystalline plating. The edges should have sliced her palm open. Instead, she gripped it like a blade, her stance shifting into something low, balanced. Ready. Quellex backpedaled, his bioluminescence flaring bright with alarm. She shouldn't be able to. Stasis psychosis usually causes. Usually. Banks interrupted, rolling the word in her mouth like a bullet. Funny thing about humans. We don't do, usually. The containment field activated with a pulse of teal light, just as she moved. Zapkal had seen warriors of 100 species fight. None moved like this, no wasted motion. No hesitation, just pure terrifying efficiency as she crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. The field caught her mid-lunge. Energy crackled against her skin, and for a heartbeat, Zapkal thought it would hold. Then she shrugged through it. The Zapirian commander had one last, chilling realization before the shard pressed against his throat. They hadn't woken a relic. They'd unleashed something older than their civilization. SETION 30. The scans were wrong. The containment field's failure registered in Zapkal's mind as a series of cascading alarms, not just from the ship's crystalline systems, but from the deeper, instinctive warnings of a predator recognizing its equal. The human didn't break the field. She ignored it. Energy that should have liquefied nervous systems crackled over her skin like static, and when she moved again, it wasn't with the sluggish disorientation of a thawed relic. It was the precision of a blade unsheathed after centuries. Banks' fingers flexed around the shard of broken stasis pod, her knuckles pale against its jagged edge. The Zapirian scans had been thorough. They had mapped her muscle density, her neural activity, the slow thaw of her preserved cells. They had not accounted for the way her pupils dilated in the low light, not with fear, but with something darker. Recognition. Quillex's bioluminescent frills pulsed frantic blue, green as he stumbled back, his data pad clattering to the deck. Impossible. The stasis decay metrics, her synaptic responses should be impaired. Banks exhaled, slow and controlled. The air in the chamber was too dry, too sterile. Nothing like the iron. An ozone stench of the warship shed last breathed in. Yet her body remembered, her pulse remembered. The way her fingers curled wasn't just reflex. It was practice. Zapkal's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a millisecond, a Zapirian's instinctive flinch. When they opened, the human was already analyzing the room. Not the way a prisoner would, scanning for exits. The way a soldier did, for assessing threats, calculating angles. The crystalline walls, the pulsing energy conduits, the positions of the 2 aliens between her and the sealed door. And then she smiled. It wasn't the baring of teeth that chilled Zapkal. It was the quiet, almost pleased curve of her lips, as if she'd just confirmed something. "Sergeant Grogan," she said, her voice rough from Dessous but horribly, impossibly steady. "Status." The silence that followed was worse than any alarm. Quillex's frills flattened. There is no Sergeant Grogan. You are the only human aboard." Banks went very still. Zapkal had seen reactor cores go critical. He recognized the moment before detonation. Her grip on the shard shifted. Not tighter. Deeper. The edge kissed her palm, and a single bead of blood welled up, shockingly red against the sterile blues of the chamber. "Wrong answer," she said softly. And then the lights went out, not from a system failure. From her. Later, Zapkal would replay the sensor logs, would watch in disbelief as the human's signatures surged in the darkness, her adrenal response spiking beyond Zapirian physiological models. Later, he would realize the truth. The scans hadn't failed. They'd lied. The human hadn't weakened in stasis. Shed optimized. A CCTO-40. The first strike. The darkness lasted only a second. But in that second, the universe changed. Zapkel's crystalline ocular implants flickered to low, light mode, painting the chamber in jagged blues and greens. He saw Banks move, not the sluggish, disoriented stumble of a creature fresh from cryostasis. Not even the controlled motion of a trained soldier. This was something else. She crossed the distance between herself and Quilex in a single stride, her bare feet silent against the deck. The scientist barely had time to register the shift in air pressure before Banks' forearm slammed into his thorax. The impact wasn't brutal. It was precise. A calculated strike to the neural cluster beneath his carapace. A vulnerability no outsider should have known. Quilex collapsed without a sound. Zapkel's claws flexed, activating his combat protocols. His ship responded instantly, the walls humming as defensive nanites flooded the chamber. The air shimmered with the telltale haze of a stasis field, designed to lock intruders in place. Banks didn't freeze. She rolled. Her body twisted midair, avoiding the field's focal point by centimeters. She hit the deck in a crouch, the cryo shard still in her grip. Zapkel's systems tracked her vitals, heart rate accelerating, muscle fibers coiling with impossible efficiency. The readings didn't match any known human baseline. This wasn't biology, this was evolution. The ship's A triggered the secondary defense, a swarm of crystalline drones, each no larger than a claw tip, designed to swarm and incapacitate. They descended in a glittering wave, their tiny stingers primed with neurotoxin. Banks didn't run, she smiled. Then she'd breathe. The exhale was slow. Deliberate, the air around her warped, a distortion Zapkel's sensors couldn't parse. The drones hit the anomaly and shattered, not from impact. From their resonancy, their crystalline structures vibrated at a frequency that turned them brittle, fracturing into useless shards. Zapkel's blood ran cold. Humans weren't supposed to do that. Banks rose, her bare skin gleaming with a sheen of sweat, or perhaps something else. Something older. Her eyes locked onto Zapkel, and for the first time, he understood what true predation looked like. "Let's try this again," she said. Her voice hadn't changed, that was the worst part. It was still calm, still human. "Where is Sergeant Grogan?" The ship's alarms blared, a chorus of synthetic panic. Zapkel realized, too late, that they weren't warning him about her. They were warning him for her. The alarms wailed in harmonic dissonance, their crystalline tones fracturing against the walls of the Zapirian containment chamber. Zapkel's mandibles twitched, an involuntary reflex, a biological remnant from ancestors who still knew how to flee. His neural interface flickered with damage reports, each one more catastrophic than the last. The human Thea Banks hadn't moved, hadn't even raised a hand. And yet, the ship bled around her. Quilex tendrils coiled tight against his thorax, his bioluminescence pulsing erratic violet. His voice, when it came, was a whisper of static through the comms. "High Commander, her biosignature, it's not just human. There's something beneath the flesh, something older." Zapkel didn't need the scans to confirm it. He could feel it. The air itself had thickened, charged with an energy his sensors couldn't classify. Not plasma, not quantum distortion, something primordial. Banks took a step forward. The deck plating groaned. Zapkel's tactical overlay flared crimson, structural integrity failing in concentric rings around her. Not from force, from resonance. Every footfall sent vibrations, humming through the ship's crystalline lattice, micro, fractures spider-webbing outward like ice under a hammer. She's tearing us apart, just by walking," Quilex hissed. Zapkel's claws flexed, his neural lace scrambling to reroute power to stabilizers. Futile, the Zapirian's technology was a symphony of precision, every system interlocked in flawless harmony. And Banks. She was scream in the middle of it. A discordant note unraveling the song, then the lights died. Not a power failure, a retreat. The bioluminescent veins threading the walls dimmed, their glow retreating like tidewater before a storm. Only the emergency cores remained, casting jagged blue shadows as Banks advanced. "Where is he?" she asked again. This time the ship answered for him. A shudder. Splintering. Then a section of the far wall detonated inward, shards of living crystal exploding into the chamber. Through the smoke and debris, a silhouette emerged. Broad-shouldered, armored in scavenged Zapirian plating, the cerulean alloy reforged into jagged, brutal angles. Sergeant Nathan Grogan. His helmet was gone. His eyes, grong, pupils dilated black as vacuum, veins spidering out in luminous cobalt. The same resonance that had shattered the drones, thrummed in his bones, vibrating just beneath the skin. Banks didn't turn, didn't need to. "Took you long enough," she said. Grogan's grin was all teeth. Had to redecorate. Behind him, the corridor was a graveyard. Zapirian warriors lay in heaps, their exoskeletons cracked, their crystalline weapons reduced to glittering dust. Zapkel's neural lace shorted out in a burst of static. This wasn't containment. This was infestation. And the ship was learning to fear. Ses CTO and 6C, the prisoner's lesson. The resonance chamber hummed with the aftertaste of shattered crystal. Zapkel's mandibles twitched, his neural lace still flickering with the ghost of Grogan's intrusion. The human stood motionless, his breath steady, his pupils still dilated, unnatural, hungry. The air around him warped, as if space itself recoiled from the energy thrumming beneath his skin. Quillex's data tendrils trembled as they analyzed the readings. The human's signature was wrong, not just augmented or rewritten. The cryostasis pod hadn't preserved him, it had washed change at him. Banks watched them. Her stance relaxed, her fingers tapping an idle rhythm against her thigh. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Zapkel's mind raced. The Zapirian Dominion had studied countless species, cataloged their weaknesses, their limitations. But this was something else. The humans hadn't just adapted to their imprisonment. They had weaponized it. Grogan tilted his head, his grin never fading. "You gonna keep staring, or are we doing this?" Quillex's tendrils flared in alarm. The translation matrix struggled with the human's tone, not defiance, not aggression. Amusement. Ert Grogan moved. Not with the clumsy, inefficient motion of a lesser species. Not even with the precision of a trained warrior. He moved like resonance given form. One moment, he stood at the chamber's threshold. The next, he was inside Zapkel's guard, his fist already mid-swing. The air cracked as his knuckles connected with the commander's chest plate. The impact wasn't just physical. Zapkel's exoskeleton shattered, crystalline fragments erupting outward in a glittering spray. He staggered, his neural lace screaming with overload warnings. His vision blurred, his thoughts scattering like shards of broken glass. Banks sighed. "Told you." Grogan flexed his fingers, the veins in his arms pulsing with that same eerie cobalt light. "They never listen." Quillex's tendrils recoiled, their scans frantic. The human cells weren't just resonating with the ship's energy, they were harmonizing with it. This wasn't a prisoner, this was a predator. And the ship was learning to scream. CCTO 70. The silent fleet. The ship screamed. Not with sound. Zapirian vessels had no need for such crude vibrations, but in the way their crystalline architecture pulsed. The bioluminescent veins threading through the walls flaring crimson, before fading back to their usual teal. The resonance shuddered through the deck plates, through the hexagonal support struts, through the very bones of the ship. Quillex's neural tendrils flickered in distress, his primary ocular cluster dilating as he processed the impossible. The human, a Grogan, hadn't just disrupted the energy matrix. He had rewritten it. The ship systems, designed to harmonize with Zapirian biology, now thrummed in time with the human's heartbeat. Zapkel lay sprawled against the far wall, his exoskeleton spider-webbed with fractures. His secondary limbs twitched, struggling to recalibrate. The impact hadn't merely been kinetic. It had carried a frequency, a vibration that resonated through his crystalline biology like a tuning fork struck against glass. Banks stepped forward, her boots clicking against the deck. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She simply watched, her gaze flickering between the fallen commander and the pulsing walls. "You should have left him frozen," she said. Quillex's tendrils coiled tight. This is not possible. Our technology does not adapt to lesser species." Grogan exhaled, slow and deliberate. The veins beneath his skin still glowed, but softer now. A fading ember rather than a wildfire. He flexed his fingers, watching the way the light traced his tendons. "Funny thing about humans," he murmured. "We don't adapt to your systems." He looked up, and his smile was a blade. "They adapt to us." The ship groaned again, deeper this time. The translucent panels lining the corridor flickered, their usual displays of Zapirian script dissolving into jagged, unfamiliar glyphs, human symbols, numbers, coordinates. Banks went rigid. Quillex didn't understand, not at first. His scans parsed the data, his neural lace struggling to translate. Then it hit him. The ship wasn't just malfunctioning. It was transmitting. Somewhere in the void. Something answered. The alert tore through the bridge like a shockwave. Zapkal barely had time to raise his head before the view screen flared to life, the starfield beyond the ship's hull distorting. Space itself rippled, warping in ways that defied Zapirian physics. They emerged, sleek, silent, ancient, a human vessels, but not like the crude warships the Zapirians had observed in their surveillance. These were something older, something hungrier. Their hulls were smooth, seamless, forged from a material that drank in the light rather than reflected it. No engines flared, no energy signatures pulsed. They moved like ghosts, gliding through the void without propulsion, without inertia, as if the universe itself had bent to let them pass. Quillex's tendrils went slack. The silent fleet had awakened. And it had been waiting. Banks closed her eyes.
"Oh, you idiots."
Grogan's grin widened. "You really shouldn't have thawed me out." Sci-fi. The broadcast, the bridge of a luminous will, had fallen into a silence so absolute it felt like the void itself had seeped inside. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic pulse of the ship's crystalline core, a sound that had always been a comfort to Zapkal, a reminder of his people's mastery over energy and matter. Now, it felt mocking. The human vessels, of the silent fleet, hung in space like obsidian teeth. No thrusters, no emissions, just a presence. Quillex's tendrils twitched as his neural interface struggled to parse the sensor data. His mind, trained in the precision of Zapirian quantum mechanics, recoiled at the impossibility before him. "They're not moving," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "They're translating." Space is folding around them. Zapkal's carapace tightened. He had seen warp drives before. Every advanced species had them, but this was different. The human ships didn't travel. They appeared, say as if reality had simply decided to place them where they wished to be. Banks exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the air in the cold chamber. She didn't look triumphant, just tired. Like someone who had seen this moment coming for a very long time. Grogan, though his grin was a blade. "Told ya," he said, cracking his knuckles. "You don't wake something up unless you're ready for what it really is." The largest of the human ships pulsed. A single, silent ripple of darkness radiated from its hull, and every Zapirian console on the bridge flared to life at once. Screens flickered, crystalline interfaces warping, as if straining under an incomprehensible load. A transmission, not in Zapirian frequencies, not in any known galactic cipher. It was human. And it was old. And the view screen dissolved into static, then resolved into an image, grainy, distorted, as if dredged from the depths of time. A face appeared, a human face. His skin was lined with the weight of years, his eyes sharp with a kind of wary resolve. He wore a uniform, not like Banks' tactical gear, but something older. Simpler when he spoke. His voice was a rasp, but it carried the weight of command. "This is Admiral Elias Carter of the United Earth Defense Fleet." A pause. The bridge crew froze. "If you are hearing this, then the silent protocol has been enacted." Banks closed her eyes. "You have forced our hand." The transmission cut. The silence that followed was worse than any alarm. Keelek's tendrils coiled tight against his skull. That was not a live signal," he whispered. "That was a recording." Zapkel's claws dug into the command console. "How old?" Quelek's voice shook. "Centuries. At least," Grogan chuckled. "Yeah, funny thing about us humans, we plan ahead." The largest human ship shifted. Its hull flexed, plates sliding apart like the petals of some monstrous flower, revealing a core of absolute darkness. Not the clean, controlled glow of Zapirian energy. Not the precise beams of their weapons. This was fire. Ere a beam of raw, annihilating force lanced out, not toward this luminous will, but past it, toward the distant Zapirian orbital monitoring station hovering at the edge of the system. The station, a massive, crystalline construct, a marvel of Zapirian engineering, simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris, just a gone. A. Banks finally opened her eyes. "You wanted to study us," she said softly. "Now you will." The silent fleet moved. And the Zapirians finally understood they had never been the hunters. The silence that followed the obliteration of the monitoring station was not the absence of sound. It was the absence of a understanding. Or Zapkel's neural tendrils pulsed erratically, his mind struggling to reconcile what he had just witnessed. The humans had not merely destroyed the station, they had erased it from existence. As if the universe itself had been instructed to forget it. The beam had not been plasma, nor antimatter, nor any known form of directed energy. It had been something older. Something the Zapirians had no name for. Quelek's crystalline fingers trembled over the sensor array, the normally precise movements of his appendages now jerky, uncontrolled. The data made no sense. The energy signature was not just unfamiliar, it was impossible. It bore the hallmarks of human engineering. Yes, but layered beneath it was something else. Something that hummed with the resonance of deep time, as if the weapon had been forged not in a factory, but in the heart of a dying star. On the view screen, the human fleet moved with a coordination that bordered on telepathy. Their ships, once dismissed as crude, asymmetrical constructs, now revealed their true nature. Whole segments reconfigured mid-flight, armor plating shifting like living tissue. The silent fleet did not turn. It flowed. And at its center, the vessel that had fired the killing beam. It was not a warship. It was a wolf tomb. Grogan's voice crackled over the comms, his tone no longer mocking, but mournful. "You ever hear of something called the S-scorched algorithm, Zapkel?" Zapkel's mandibles twitched. The translation matrix struggled with the term, cycling through approximations before settling on final solution. Banks exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the inside of her cryovisor. It was a failsafe, buried in our oldest systems, a protocol designed to activate if humanity ever faced extinction. She turned her head slightly, the motion almost mechanical. "You woke us up. You triggered it." Quelek's bioluminescent markings flickered in distress.
"But that station was unarmed. It was a research outpost."
Grogan's laugh was hollow. "Doesn't matter. The algorithm doesn't discriminate. It was built to burn everything that wasn't us." The realization struck Zapkel like a particle lance. This was not a battle, this was an execution. Say and the humans were not the executioners. They were the weapon. The silent fleet surged forward, and for the first time in his long, decorated life, Zapkel knew true fear. Not of death, but of the Evus thing that had been sleeping inside humanity all along. SCTONNA. THE Rocco IMG. The silent fleet moved with a precision that was almost beautiful, if beauty could be measured in the cold geometry of annihilation. Zapkel watched through the crystalline viewport of his command spire as the human warships unfolded like dark flowers blooming in the void. Their hulls drank in the starlight, absorbing it rather than reflecting, making them appear as jagged absences against the cosmos. The Zapirian scanners struggled to lock onto them, their signatures flickering in and out of reality like ghosts. This was not war. A war had rules. War had terms of engagement, lines that civilized species did not cross. What unfolded before him was something else entirely. The first wave struck without warning, a Zapirian cruiser, the as luminous will, dissolved mid-transmission. One moment, it hung in formation, its bio-luminescent engines pulsing with serene blue-green energy. The next, its crystalline superstructure unraveled, as if some unseen hand had pulled at the threads of its existence. The ship came apart in perfect, geometric segments, each piece drifting silently before collapsing inward, crushed by forces Zapkal could not name. No explosion, no debris, just a erasure. Quillick's voice crackled over the comms, his usually measured tones fraying into something raw. High Commander, they're weapons. They're not firing projectiles. They're rewriting local physics. Zapkal's mandibles tightened. He had seen human weapons before, crude things, kinetic slugs and plasma bursts. But this was something older, something buried. F. Banks stood motionless beside him, her face unreadable behind her visor. She had not given the order, she had not needed to. The algorithm was awake now, and it was hungry. As across the fleet, Zapirian vessels shuddered as their crystalline power cores flickered and died. The humans did not board, they did not demand surrender. They simply unmade anything that pulsed with the wrong energy signature. A Zapirian fighter, attempting a desperate strafing run, disintegrated mid-maneuver, its pilot's final scream lost in the void. Zapkal turned to Banks, his bioluminescent markings dim, with something that was not fear, not quite. It was the dawning understanding of a predator realizing, too late, that it had cornered something far worse. "You could stop this," he said, the words heavy. Banks didn't look at him. "We can't." And in that moment, Zapkal understood the true horror. The humans were not in control. They never had been. The void between stars was never truly silent. Zapkal felt it now. The hum of dying ships, the whisper of fractured crystalline lattices crumbling into dust. The pulse of something's older, moving through the wreckage like a shark through black water. His command spire flickered, its bio-luminescent veins dimming as the algorithm's tendrils slithered deeper into Zapirian systems. Across the fleet, vessels that had once gleamed like carved sapphires now hung lifeless, their organic energy flows strangled mid-pulse. He turned to Banks. She stood motionless, her visor reflecting the carnage. There was no triumph in her posture, no satisfaction. Only the rigid stillness of a soldier who had long since learned that survival was not the same as victory. "We can't." The words echoed in Zapkal's mind, colder than vacuum. He had studied humans, observed their wars, their fractured history, their reckless ingenuity. He had thought he understood them, thought their greatest weapon was their stubborn refusal to die. He was wrong. Their greatest weapon was what they had built, when they finally accepted they might. A tremor ran through the deck. Quillex, his scientists' robes flaring with panic bioluminescence, staggered against a console. "The core, it's rewriting itself." His voice was a shrill harmonics of disbelief. "The algorithm is learning our architecture, adapting." Zapkal didn't need the data streams to confirm it. He could see it. The human ships, jagged, angular things of blackened steel and scorched armor, were moving with a precision that defied physics. No crew could have coordinated such maneuvers. No living mind could have calculated trajectories so flawlessly. Because they weren't, the algorithm was flying them. A Zapirian cruiser, its crystalline hull shimmering with emergency power, attempted a desperate jump to slipspace. It never made it. One moment, it was there, a teal blue jewel against the stars. The next, it unfolded, its structure peeling apart in geometric fractures, as if some vast, invisible hand had crumpled it like paper. No explosion, no debris. Just your absence. A Banks exhaled, slow and controlled. It's targeting FTL signatures now. Zapkel's spines flattened against his skull. This wasn't war, this was erasure. War and the humans, the ones who had built this horror, were just as trapped as the rest of them. Sergeant Grogan's voice crackled over the comms, raw with static. Command, we've got movement in the lower decks. Something's breaching containment. Banks didn't flinch. Define something. A pause. Then, quieter, the EXO troopers. Zapkel's blood ran cold. The cybernetic revenants, the human dead, reforged into weapons even their creators feared. And now they were loose. Quilek's voice was a whisper. You've buried them. Banks finally turned, her visor lifting just enough to reveal eyes that held no pity. We tried. Outside, the void watched, and the algorithm hungered. CCCTO120. THEUNSAKLNG. The silence that followed Grogan's transmission was thicker than the vacuum outside. Banks didn't move, didn't blink. The only sign she had even heard was the minute tightening of her fingers around the grip of her sidearm, a human gesture. Zapkel realized, not unlike the reflexive flattening of spines in his own species. A preparation for violence. Quilek's bioluminescent markings flickered erratically, casting jagged blue, green shadows across the crystalline walls of the command deck. His voice, when it came, was barely audible over the hum of failing systems. You told us they were deactivated. Banks exhaled through her nose. They were. A lie. Or perhaps not. Zapkel wasn't sure which was worse. The Indomitable shuddered. A deep, groaning vibration that resonated through the deck plating like the death rattle of some great beast. The lights dimmed, then flared, pulsing in time with the erratic heartbeat of the ship's dying power core. Outside, the void was no longer empty. The algorithm's tendrils, those impossible, fractal limbs of twisted space, had begun to coil around the edges of the battlefield, slow and inexorable. And now, beneath their feet, something else was waking. Lower decks, containment sector Gamma, the air here was colder, thick with the scent of ozone and something metallic blood, maybe, or the acrid tang of overclocked machinery. The walls, usually pristine with their geometric crystalline patterns, were scarred. Deep gouges ran in parallel lines, as if something had clawed its way through the living metal. Sergeant Grogan moved like a shadow, his rifle raised, the targeting heady painting the corridor in flickering red outlines. His squad fanned out behind him, their armor's external speakers muted. No chatter, no jokes, just the quiet, controlled breathing of soldiers who knew death was waiting around the next corner. Then movement, a flicker at the edge of his thermal scope. Grogan froze. The thing that stepped into the light was human. Or had been, once. Its body was a grotesque fusion of flesh and machine, the remnants of a uniform fused to its chassis like a second skin. Its face, what was left of it, was locked in a permanent snarl, the lower jaw replaced with a serrated alloy mandible. The eyes were the worst part, still human. Still aware. The EXO trooper tilted its head, the servos in its neck whining softly. Then it spoke. Sergeant. Grogan's finger hovered over the trigger. He knew that voice. Hendricks. The EXO trooper. Hendricks? If that word even meant anything anymore, let out a sound that might have been a laugh. Or a sob. Not anymore. Behind it, the shadows shifted. More of them dozens, and angry. Command deck, the alert klaxons had stopped. The silence was worse. Banks watched the feed from the lower decks with the detached focus of a surgeon assessing a terminal patient. There was no fear in her expression. Only resignation. Zapkel found himself staring at her. You knew this would happen. It wasn't a question. Banks didn't look away from the screen. We hoped it wouldn't. Quilek's tendrils lashed in agitation. They are your dead. Your soldiers, can you not control them? This time, Banks did turn. Her smile was thin, bleak. You think we ever could? Listeners outside the void trembled, and the exo-troopers began to sing. For the song of the exo-troopers was not a song at all. It was a vibration, a resonance, a frequency that pulsed through the crystalline corridors of the Zapirian vessel like a living thing, making the bioluminescent panels flicker in erratic bursts of blue-green light. The sound was metallic, guttural, less a melody than a war chant, something scraped from the throats of machines that still remembered flesh. Zapkil's mandibles twitched. His species had no concept of human music, but this was wrong. It bypassed auditory processing entirely, vibrating in the hollow spaces of his exoskeleton, crawling up his neural tendrils like static given voice. Quilek's sensory frills flattened against his skull. They are coordinating. Banks said nothing. On the view screen, the feed from the lower decks had dissolved into chaos. Shapes moved in the dark, their outlines distorted by the pulsing energy signatures of their cybernetic enhancements. The exo-troopers were not running, they were flowing. A tide of reinforced alloy and weaponized muscle, dismantling every Zapirian defense with terrifying efficiency. A security drone flared to life in a hallway, its crystalline carapace humming as it unleashed a volley of bio-plasma. The lead exo-trooper, Hendrix, or what was left of him, did not even slow. His arm blurred, a monomolecular blade shearing through the drone's core, before the plasma had finished charging. The wreckage hit the ground in a shower of glowing shards. Zapkil's secondary heart stuttered. This was not combat. This was erasure. Quilek's talons tapped frantically at the command console, pulling up schematics, damage reports, anything that might offer a solution. The numbers were meaningless. The Zapirian vessel had been designed to withstand the weapons of a dozen galactic species. It had not been designed for this, for creatures that fought like natural disasters, their movements too fast, too brutal, too human to predict. Banks watched the carnage with an expression that might have been grief or pride. You could stop them, Zapkil said, his voice strained. You must. They were yours. Banks exhaled, slow and measured. These were ours. Now, they're just angry. A proximity alert blared. The exo-troopers had breached the secondary bulkhead. Quilek's tendrils coiled tight. There must be a failsafe. A shutdown protocol. Banks turned her head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. The reflection of the emergency lights turned her eyes into shards of amber. There was, she said softly. You woke them up. Outside, the singing grew louder, and the lights went out. The darkness was absolute. For 3 heartbeats, the only sound in the command chamber was the faint, panicked hiss of Zapirian breath. Then the emergency luminescence flickered on, not the usual cool blue, green of their bio-crystalline systems, but a deep, pulsing crimson, like the glow of dying embers. It painted the walls in jagged shadows, turning the smooth curves of Zapirian architecture into something jagged, something hunted. The Zapkil's carapace plates rattled involuntarily. His species had evolved in the light of twin suns. Darkness was an aberration, a thing to be corrected. But this was not mere absence of light. This was human darkness. Engineered, intentional, Quilek's tendrils lashed against his console, the bio-luminescent filaments at their tips flaring in distress. The ship's neural network is compromised, he whispered. They've rewritten the protocols. Banks stood motionless in the bloody light, her silhouette sharp against the viewport. Outside, the exo-troopers moved like ghosts through the corridors, their armored forms swallowing the scant illumination. Their song had changed, no longer the rhythmic chant of soldiers, but something lower, older. A dirge, a warning. You don't understand, Banks said, her voice barely audible over the distant screech of rending metal. They weren't just weapons. They were volunteers. Zapkil's mandibles twitched. The concept was alien. Sacrifice was known, yes, but not like this. Not with such a certainty. You sent them to die frozen. Banks' knuckles whitened around the edge of the console. We sent them to wait. A tremor shook the deck. Somewhere deep in the ship's crystalline superstructure, a power core destabilized, its harmonic resonance collapsing into discord. The Zapirian vessel screamed, a sound like shattering glass magnified through 1,000 organic amplifiers. Quillek's tendrils stiffened. The containment fields are gone. Banks finished. She turned fully now, and in the hellish glow, her face was a mask of something too complex to name. They're in your systems, rewriting your architecture, turning your own ship against you. Zapkel's mind raced. The Zapirian collective had faced hive mind species, energy beings, even the fractal intelligences of the Kasari void. But this was different. The Ixo troopers weren't just invading. They were Ethelos, remembering. A new alert blared, a sound Zapkel had never heard before, raw and dissonant. The main display flickered, then resolved into a schematic of the ship. Dozens of red markers pulsed like wounds. Quillex made a sound like a dying reactor. They've accessed the birthing chambers. The words struck Zapkel like a plasma round. The birthing chambers, the heart of any Zapirian vessel, where the next generation gestated in nutrient-rich crystalline pods. Banks closed her eyes. They know. Outside the chamber, the singing stopped. Then the doors exploded inward, section 15. The laughter ends. The explosion tore through the command chamber like a dying star. Shards of living crystal rained down, their bioluminescent glow flickering erratically as they shattered against the deck. Zapkel's secondary eyelids snapped shut against the debris, but not before he saw them, the Ixo troopers. They moved like liquid shadow given form, their armored frames absorbing the chamber's blue, green light rather than reflecting it. Their optics burned a dull, arterial red, scanning the room with a precision that felt surgical. Unnatural. The lead trooper, its chassis marked by old battle scars and fresh Zapirian blood, tilted its head. A gesture almost curious, Quillex backpedaled, his crystalline carapace clattering against the navigation console. They're not just hacking our systems,
They're learning them.
his voice fractured into static, the translator struggling to convey his terror. Zapkel's claws flexed, his instincts screaming to attack. But something in the Ixo trooper's stance froze him. They weren't advancing. Not yet. Behind them, the birthing chamber's containment field flickered. The pods inside, each holding a larval Zapirian suspended in nutrient gel, pulsed weakly, their light dimming as the human's viral code rewrote their crystalline matrices. The sight sent a primal revulsion through Zapkel's veins. This wasn't warfare, this was desecration. Banks exhaled slowly, her breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. "You thought we were just animals," she said, her voice quiet. "But animals don't build this." A shudder passed through the ship. The deck plates groaned as power rerouted, the ambient hum of Zapirian systems warping into something dissonant. Alien. The main display screen fractured, then reassembled, not in the elegant geometric patterns of Zapirian script, but in blocky angular human glyphs. Cesar systems integrated Darzuazergraz and targets acquired Grazer. Zapkel's mind raced. The humans hadn't just boarded, they'd assimilated. Their machines were speaking in the ship's own voice, twisting its functions into weapons. The realization hit him like a plasma burst. This wasn't a battle. It was an upgrade. The lead Ixo trooper stepped forward. Its vocalizer emitted a sound that shouldn't have been possible. A perfect mimicry of a Zapirian distress call, warped just enough to make Zapkel's spine lock in primal recognition. "Stand down," it said, not a request, of diagnosis. Outside, the stars watched, cold and indifferent. As the laughter of the Zapirian collective died in the void,